Detective Finn Tinnel here. Dr. Fields has asked me to discuss Title 21 of the United States Code, USC, the Controlled Substances Act. The Controlled Substances Act, CSA, establishes a unified legal framework to regulate certain drugs and other substances that are deemed to pose a risk of abuse and dependence. The CSA may apply to drugs that are medical or recreational, legally or illicitly distributed, but the statute does not apply to all drugs. It applies to drugs and other substances that have been designated for control by Congress or through administrative proceedings. The CSA also applies to controlled substance analogs that are intended to mimic the effects of controlled substances and to certain listed chemicals, chemicals commonly used to manufacture controlled substances. Controlled substances subject to the CSA are divided into categories known as Schedules 1 through 5 based on their medical utility and their potential for abuse and dependence. Substances considered to pose the greatest risk to the public health and safety are subject to the most stringent controls and sanctions. A lower schedule number corresponds to greater restrictions, so substances in Schedule 1 are subject to the strictest controls, while substances in Schedule 5 are subject to the least strict. The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, is the federal agency primarily responsible for implementing and enforcing the CSA. I work closely with the DEA on task forces. Background and scope of the CSA. With the passage of the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914, Congress began in earnest to regulate the domestic trade in narcotic drugs. The Harrison Act imposed federal oversight of the legal trade in narcotic drugs and imposed criminal penalties for illicit trafficking in narcotics. Over the course of the 20th century, the list of drugs subject to federal control expanded beyond narcotic drugs to include marijuana, depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. In 1970, Congress passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, known as the Controlled Substances Act. That act imposed a unified framework of federal controlled substance regulation. The CSA regulates certain drugs and other substances, whether medical or recreational, legally or illicitly distributed, that are found to pose a risk of abuse and dependence. In enacting the CSA, Congress recognized two competing interests related to drug regulation. On one hand, many drugs have a useful and legitimate medical purpose and are necessary to maintain the health and general welfare of the American people. On the other hand, illegal importation, manufacture, distribution, and possession and improper use of controlled substances have a substantial and detrimental effect on the health and general welfare of the American people. The Act simultaneously aims to protect the public from the dangers of controlled substances while ensuring access to controlled substances for legitimate purposes. For medical drugs, the CSA primarily applies to prescription drugs, not drugs available over the counter. As for non-pharmaceutical drugs, well-known recreational drugs such as cocaine, heroin, and lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, are all controlled substances. Some controlled substances, such as marijuana and fentanyl, are used for both medical and recreational purposes. In addition to the federal CSA, California has its own controlled substances laws, most of which are contained in the Health and Safety Code, H&S. You learn more about those laws in another lesson in this class. States cannot alter federal law. When state and federal law conflict, the federal law controls. Thus, when states legalize or decriminalize a federally controlled substance, such as marijuana, the sole result is that the substance is no longer criminal under state law. Federal controls remain in effect and are potentially enforceable in those states, including California. Keep that in mind, kids, if you are considering a career with the feds like FBI or DEA. Be sure and read the textbook chapter on this topic for the exam. I'm Detective Finn Tinnel, and that is your lesson on the Controlled Substances Act.